She said, "You should head home, it's too much at your age," then shut the door in my face. My daughter's laugh echoed from the dining room while I stood on the porch holding a plastic bag of cold leftovers, food I paid for, in a house I built, for a family I raised. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 days later, I found out my own son had already filed to take the deed, behind my back. They didn't just cut me out of dinner. They tried to erase me from my own home. But what they didn't know? The house deed said something else, and Margaret made damn sure her signature still meant something. My name is Walter Ellison, and I'm 75 years old. After 50 years of fixing engines and raising a family, I now spend my days alone in the two-story Craftsman, where Margaret and I built our life together. My son Michael, once eager for my mechanic's wisdom, now sends terse texts about checking in, while my daughter Evelyn, who used to bring Sunday dinners, claims her schedule's too full to visit her father. The stairs creak under my feet as I move between rooms, my oil-stained hands trailing along the banister that still carries the ghost of Margaret's lemon polish. My late wife Margaret knew something I didn't. Her deed folder sits in the kitchen drawer, alongside a letter she left for when you'll need it most. But let me start from the beginning. You know what made Thanksgiving sacred in our family? Margaret's insistence that we'd gather no matter what storms life threw our way. Even during the oil crisis of '73, when the shop barely kept afloat, we made it work. So there I was, standing outside Michael's house last November, watching my breath cloud in the porch light, same as I had for the past 5 years since Margaret passed. The late afternoon sun was already fading behind the trees, but I could see Evelyn's minivan parked in the drive next to Michael's SUV. Inside, the TV blared with football commentary, and silverware clinked against plates. The smell of roasted turkey and Margaret's secret stuffing recipe, the one I'd taught Michael's wife Melissa years ago, drifted through the gap under the door. I knocked, adjusting my collar. Used to be, Margaret would have fussed over my tie, making sure it sat straight before we headed to family gatherings. These days, I mostly wore what was clean and comfortable. The door cracked open just enough for Melissa's face to appear. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Walter, I was just about to text you." Behind her, laughter erupted from the dining room. I caught a glimpse of my grandson Tommy's red sweater as he darted past. The warmth from inside hit my face like a taunt. "I brought that cranberry sauce Evelyn always liked," I said, holding up the glass container. My daughter used to scrape the bowl clean when she was little, asking for seconds even at breakfast the next day. Melissa's eyes darted to something behind her. "That's thoughtful." She disappeared for a moment, then returned with a white plastic grocery bag. "Here, we packed you a plate. There's turkey, some potatoes, a slice of pie." My hands felt numb as I took the bag, but not from the cold. Through the thin plastic, I could feel the containers were barely warm. They'd planned this, planned to keep me outside like some stray cat they were kind enough to feed. "The thing is," Melissa continued, her voice dropping to match the growing shadows, "seating's really tight this year. We've got Michael's work colleagues over, and with the kids' table." She trailed off, letting the excuse hang between us. I swallowed hard. "I could bring in a chair from—" "It's probably best if you head home and rest," she cut in smoothly. "You know how these gatherings can be overwhelming at your age." My age. I'd rebuilt engines older than her with these hands, but somehow I'd become too fragile for my own family's Thanksgiving table. The door clicked shut before I could respond. Through the decorative window panes, I watched Melissa's shape merge back into the warm glow of the dining room. Someone proposed a toast. I heard the crystal glasses chime. Standing there on November 25th, clutching a plastic bag of charity, I felt something inside me crack. The bag's handles bit into my palm as I gripped it tighter, the cold seeping through my jacket. What changed after Margaret died? When did I stop being dad and become a burden? A car passed on the street, its headlights sweeping across the house's facade. The shadows shifted, and for a moment I saw our reflection in the window. The empty porch where Margaret should have stood beside me, her hand steady on my arm like always. I turned away, my shoes crunching on the frost-covered path. The streetlight hummed overhead, casting my shadow long and thin across the sidewalk. Part of me wanted to march back up those steps, pound on the door, demand answers. But Margaret taught me better than that. So I kept walking, silent as the evening settling around me. But somewhere in our old house, in a drawer full of memories and Margaret's careful planning, an answer waited. I just didn't know it yet. I drove home on autopilot, muscle memory guiding me through streets I'd known for 50 years. The plastic bag sat in the passenger seat, where Margaret used to ride, her voice still clear in my mind, pointing out Christmas lights, or asking me to stop at the corner store for her crossword magazines. The house was dark when I pulled in, just like it had been every night since she passed. I didn't bother with the porch light. Inside, the kitchen felt hollow, Margaret's old clock on the wall ticking away like it was counting down to something. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound echoed off the empty chairs, the clean counters, the life we'd built together. I set that damned plastic bag on the counter. Its contents probably cold as stone by now. You ever notice how charity can feel like a slap? Standing there in my own kitchen, I felt every bit the outsider they'd made me on that porch. The drawer scraped open, the one by the sink where Margaret kept everything important. Bills, recipes, warranties for appliances long since replaced, and underneath it all, that manila folder I hadn't touched in years. The deed to our house, the one piece of paper. That proved everything we'd worked for. The folder's edges were soft from age, coffee stains marking the corners where we'd sat planning renovations or discussing property taxes. I spread it open on the counter, right under the light where I could see clearly. The official papers were there, sure, but what caught my eye was that extra page, Margaret's handwriting flowing across it like she'd just set it down yesterday. In addition to standard deed provisions, I read aloud, my finger tracing her words. Walter James Ellison maintains sole controlling ownership until death, with all decision rights thereof. Her signature curved beneath it, alongside Frank's notary stamp. Old Frank, who'd taught me about document verification during our Navy days. The memory hit me then. Margaret insisting we add this clause, her voice firm despite the cancer eating at her. Just to be safe, she'd said. Just to make sure you're secure. I'd nodded, not really understanding why it mattered so much to her. Now I knew. Michael's voice echoed in my head from 3 weeks ago. Dad, we should really modernize all this paperwork, get everything digitized and properly managed. He'd reached for this very folder, but I'd shut the drawer, telling him we'd deal with it later. The clock kept ticking as I pulled out my phone, carefully photographing each page. The clause, the signatures, the notary stamps. Frank had shown me what to look for. Dates, proper alignment, the raised seal catching the light just right. Everything checked out. The humiliation from that porch started shifting inside me, transforming into something steadier. Not anger. I'd seen enough angry old men in my time to know that route led nowhere. No, this was different. This was purpose. I set up the coffee maker, the fancy one Evelyn gave me last Christmas, probably hoping I'd invite them over more. While it brewed, I found a notepad in Margaret's old secretary desk. The paper still smelled faintly of her hand lotion. At the top, I wrote, "Confirm clause validity, Frank." Below that, "Document current condition." Then, "Review transfer requirements." The list grew as my coffee cooled, each item another brick in the foundation I was building. The plastic bag still sat on the counter, a reminder of where I stood with them now. My eyes drifted to the calendar, November 25th. Michael's house would still be lit up, dishes being cleared, everyone warm and satisfied with their kindness to poor old Dad. I could drive back now, knock on that door again, this time with Margaret's papers in hand, show them what real ownership looked like. But Margaret's voice whispered from the ticking clock. Patience. Walter, do it right. So I sat at our kitchen table, the deed spread out before me, and started making calls. I couldn't sit there staring at those papers any longer. The coffee had gone cold, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from age, mind you, but from something building inside that needed release. You know that feeling when you've got truth burning in your pocket? That's what drove me back out into the night. The walk to Michael's took 15 minutes. Stars scattered overhead like diamond dust on black velvet. Margaret used to love nights like this, clear and crisp enough to make your lungs ache. I clutched the deed folder close, its edges sharp against my chest through my old work jacket. Their house blazed with light, every window a golden rectangle cutting through the darkness. Melissa's laugh rang out clear as a bell, probably telling that story about her college days. Again, the one she always saves for company. Music drifted from somewhere inside, not the old standards we used to play, but something modern and insistent. Michael was in the driveway, sending off his in-laws with hugs and leftover pie. I waited until their taillights disappeared around the corner before stepping into the flood of his motion sensor light. He spotted me and froze, one hand still raised in goodbye. "Dad?" The surprise in his voice wasn't entirely pleasant. "What are you doing back here?" I held up the folder, keeping my voice steady as a steel beam. "Found something interesting after dinner. Thought we should discuss it." "It's late," he said, glancing back at the house. "Can't this wait until—" "Your mother added a clause to the deed." I pulled out the relevant page, Margaret's handwriting clear under the harsh porch light. "Gives me sole controlling ownership until I die, properly notarized and everything." He didn't take the paper. Instead, a smile spread across his face, not the warm one I remembered from his childhood, but something harder. Professional, the kind he probably used in his contracting business when dealing with difficult clients. "Dad," he said like he was explaining something to a child, "the house is already ours. We've got the transfer papers ready to file. Makes more sense this way. You know, tax-wise and all that." My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice level. "No transfer without my consent. Margaret made sure of that." "Look," he shifted his weight, hands sliding into his pockets. "We've been thinking it might be easier for everyone if you considered Pine Grove Retirement Village. Nice place, lots of activities. No maintenance to worry about." The words hit like ice water. Pine Grove, where they warehouse old folks who've outlived their usefulness, where my friend Jack spent his last 3 months staring at beige walls until his mind gave up. "I'm not discussing retirement homes," I said, each word measured and clean. "The clause is binding." Margaret knew what she was doing. Something changed in Michael's face then. A subtle shift, like a mask settling into place. He'd been expecting this conversation, I realized, had probably rehearsed it. "We'll see about that," he said smoothly. "Legal documents can be complicated at your age. Why don't you sleep on it?" Above us, the porch light flickered, casting strange shadows across the driveway where we'd taught him to ride his first bike, where Margaret had photographed him heading off to prom, where we'd been a family. The cold was seeping through my jacket now, but it wasn't the temperature making me shiver. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders, shake some sense into him, make him remember who built the life he was so casually dismantling. Instead, I tucked the paper back into its folder. "I'll bring the documentation by in the morning," I said. "We can discuss it then." He shrugged, actually shrugged, like we were debating paint colors instead of my home. "Whatever you want, Dad. Just remember what I said about Pine Grove." I turned away before the heat in my chest could escape as words I'd regret. Shouting wouldn't help. I'd learned that much in 75 years. This needed something else. Someone else. As I walked home under those cold stars, a name surfaced in my mind. Frank. My old Navy buddy who'd stamped this very clause, who knew every legal trick in the book. I couldn't sleep after leaving Michael's driveway. You know how your mind spins when something's not right. I paced the kitchen until first light, watching that plastic leftover bag mock me from the counter. The second the clock struck 6, I dialed Frank's number. 3 rings, then that familiar growl, "Someone better be dying, Walt." "Frank, need your eyes on something legal." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. A grunt followed by bed springs creaking. "Hold on, let me get my glasses." Paper shuffled in the background. "This about the house?" "Margaret left a clause in the deed. Need to know if it'll hold up." "The one I notarized." More shuffling. "Yeah, I remember that day. She was adamant about the wording." Frank cleared his throat. "Send me pictures. I'll check against current statutes." My hands shook a bit as I laid out the papers under the kitchen light. Had to take the photos 3 times to get them clear enough. "Sending now," I told him. "Coffee's getting cold while I wait." You ever notice how time moves different when you're waiting on bad news? I watched steam fade from my mug, counted the ticks of Margaret's wall clock, tried not to think about Michael's smirk or that retirement home threat. The phone buzzed 20 minutes later. "Walt, you sitting down? Just tell me, Frank." Good news and bad news. Clause is solid as a battleship. Margaret knew what she was doing. Your signatures required for any transfer, period. Relief flooded through me. But Frank's tone had an edge. "And the bad news?" Pulled some strings, checked the county records. A heavy pause. Michael filed transfer papers last week. Set to execute December 1st. My coffee went bitter in my mouth. I grabbed the calendar off the wall, counted days twice. That's less than 2 weeks. 13 days to be exact. And county offices close for 4 of those with the holiday weekend. I uncapped a marker, wrote, "Ticking clock" in bold letters next to December 1st. What's my play here, Frank? Already printed the forms you'll need. Papers rustled again. Get your residency proof together, utility bills, tax records, everything showing continuous occupation. And Walt, find a lawyer. Today. I had my satchel open before he finished speaking. Started pulling files, property taxes going back 5 years, every home repair receipt, Margaret's original deed. Got a recommendation? Sarah Chen on Main Street. Handles estate law, knows her stuff. I'll call her first thing. Get you bumped up the list. My hand was steady now as I arranged the documents. Frank walked me through initial filing forms, his voice carrying that old Navy precision. The same tone he'd used teaching me to read weather patterns at sea. "One more thing," he said. "When you meet Chen, keep it professional, no matter what. Michael's done, judges don't like family drama. Make this about law, not blood." I practiced the words while I organized the satchel. "This concerns deed validity and transfer authorization. Clean, clinical, like diagnosing an engine knock instead of a son's betrayal." "Got it," I said, clicking the satchel shut. "Meeting tomorrow? I'll text you the time. Set 2 alarms. Chen's strict about punctuality." After we hung up, I pulled the calendar. Closer. 13 boxes stared back at me. December 1st circled in red like a target. Margaret's clock kept time in the corner, each tick another second gone. You want to know the strange part? I wasn't angry anymore. Hurt, sure, disappointed in ways I couldn't name. But mostly I felt clear, like when you're working on a difficult repair and suddenly see the problem plain as day. I set those alarms Frank mentioned, then sat watching shadows creep across the kitchen floor. Every sweep of that second hand sounded like a countdown now, but I had Margaret's claws, Frank's guidance, and something Michael seemed to have forgotten. 50 years of learning how to fix what's broken. The next morning, I pulled into Harrison Associates 10 minutes early, my satchel heavy with 50 years of paperwork. Frank's voice crackled through my phone speaker as I parked. "Remember what we discussed," he said. "Let the documents do the talking." Attorney Harris met me in a conference room that smelled of leather and lemon polish, not Margaret's brand, but close enough to make my throat tight. He was younger than I expected, but his handshake was firm and his eyes stayed sharp as I laid out the timeline. "The addendum's here," I said, sliding Margaret's claws across the polished table. Frank notarized it himself. Harris adjusted his glasses, studying each page like I used to study repair manuals. "The notarization's clean," he murmured, more to himself than me. "Filing date predates any counterclaims. Signatures verified." Frank cleared his throat through the speaker. "Walt's got the full deed history too, John, plus a draft petition I helped outline." I opened my satchel again, placing each document exactly as Frank had instructed. Deed first. Tax records fanned. Beneath, utility bills arranged by date. Harris nodded as he scanned them, his pen tapping steadily. "This is thorough," he said finally. "I can have a motion drafted within the hour. We'll file this afternoon if that works for you." The knot in my chest loosened a fraction. That would be fine. You know that feeling when a stubborn engine finally turns over? That's how it felt watching Harris's secretary stamp copies, assign a docket number, pencil in a tentative hearing date, like parts clicking into place after too long running rough. "I'll call my daughter," I said as Harris gathered the files. "She should hear this from me." Frank made a warning sound, but I was already dialing. The phone rang 4 times before Evelyn picked up. "Dad, I'm heading into a meeting." "This won't take long." I kept my voice level, professional, just facts, like Frank taught me. "I'm at the lawyer's, office. There's something in Mom's deed you both need to know about." A pause. Papers shuffled on her end. "Michael's handling the house paperwork," she said, her tone cooling. "He said you're making things difficult." My free hand curled against the armrest. "Your mother left specific instructions about ownership. The court will sort it out." "Dad," she sighed. That same sound she used when her kids were being unreasonable. "We're trying to help. Why can't you just let Michael handle this?" The way she said handle, like I was a problem to solve instead of their father, made my jaw ache. But I remembered Frank's words about keeping it professional. "The court will speak for itself," I said quietly. "That's all I wanted you to know." Harris was watching me as I hung up. He slid a crisp folder across the table. "Your copies," he said. "We'll file electronically this afternoon and as in confirmation." I stepped out into the morning chill, feeling lighter than I had since Thanksgiving. My breath fogged in the air as I checked my watch. Still early enough to swing by Anderson's Hardware. They had those brass picture hooks Margaret always wanted for her family photos. Funny how hope works. One minute you're planning home improvements, letting yourself believe things might work out. The next, my phone buzzed at the crosswalk. Harris's number. Strange, I'd just left his office. The message was brief, professional, devastating. "Mr. Ellison, I regret to inform you that I must withdraw as your representative due to personal reasons. My office will refund your retainer. I wish you the best of luck." The sidewalk seemed to shift under my feet. Cars rolled past, pedestrians brushed by, but I stood frozen, reading those words again and again. Behind me, the law office. Windows reflected morning sun like nothing had changed, but something had. You could feel it in the air, that same heaviness that comes before a storm. I'd felt it enough times at sea with Frank to recognize the warning. I drove home with that satchel sitting heavy in the passenger seat, right where Margaret used to keep her purse. The leather felt cold when I grabbed it, like everything else was turning against me. You ever notice how bad news travels faster than good? By the time I got to my kitchen and started working the phone, it felt like someone had posted warnings all over town. First call was to Peterson and Mills. They'd handled the Wilson family's estate matter last spring. The receptionist put me on hold for 10 minutes, came back sounding apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. We have a conflict of interest with this matter." Second try was Barbara Chen's office. She'd done my taxes for 15 years, knew Margaret. This time I didn't even get past the initial screening. "We're not taking new cases until March." Third call, last number Frank had given me, went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to sound casual, professional. They never called back. I sat there at Margaret's kitchen table watching shadows creep across the wall, the way those doors slammed shut. Too quick, too coordinated. Had to be. Evelyn's fingerprints. She'd clerked for half the lawyers in town during law school, still had those connections. Probably made some calls while I was meeting with Harris. "They're not going to let this be easy," I muttered to the empty chair across from me. Margaret would have understood. She always said Evelyn got her stubborn streak honest. Frank's voice crackled through my cell. "File the papers yourself, Walt. I've got a checklist ready." So I grabbed that satchel again and headed for the county office. The records counter was quiet. Just me and a clerk who looked barely old enough to drive. She took my papers, scanned barcodes, processed fees like it was any other Tuesday. "Should be indexed within 48 hours, she said, sliding me a receipt. "You'll get email confirmation." First time all day my shoulders relaxed. I even stopped at the grocery store on the way home. Picked up coffee, some nails for those picture hooks, and a bag of lemons. Margaret always kept lemons in the kitchen, said they brightened everything up. You know that moment when you wake up and everything feels wrong? That hit me the next morning. No confirmation email, no update on the docket lookup, nothing but silence and that deadline creeping closer. I was back at the records counter before they'd finished brewing their morning coffee. Different. Clark this time, older, looked like she'd seen every trick in the book. "Ellison, filing." She pecked at her keyboard. "Nothing's showing up in the system." My hand found the edge of the counter. "I submitted everything yesterday. Got a receipt right here." She barely glanced at it. "Sometimes things don't scan properly. You'll need to resubmit." Resubmit? The word tasted like copper in my mouth. The original documents are time-stamped. Fees paid. How does that just vanish? She shrugged. That bureaucratic gesture that says, "Not my problem." System shows no record. "Want me to print you a fresh form?" I felt my fingers pressing harder into the counter's edge. December 1st was breathing down my neck, and here we were, playing games with missing papers. "I need to speak with your supervisor," I said, keeping my voice steady like Frank taught me. "Today." She started to shake her head, but I pulled out that receipt again. "Today," I repeated. "Not tomorrow, not next week, today." My hands weren't shaking anymore. Funny how anger can steady you sometimes, give you back your balance when everything else is tilting. "I'll see if Mr. Rodriguez is available," she said finally. "Have a seat." I pocketed the receipt and settled into one of those hard plastic chairs, watching the minute hand tick on the wall clock above the counter. Time was running out, sure, but I hadn't spent 40 years fixing broken engines without learning something about patience and persistence. I spent that whole afternoon documenting everything, right down to the color of the clerk's sweater. Frank had drilled this into me during our Navy days. When the system's working against you, paper trails become your best friend. "Detail is ammunition," I muttered, checking my watch again. 2:47 p.m. Rodriguez, the records supervisor, had finally surfaced after 3 hours of meetings. He sat across his desk from me now, flipping through my timeline while I watched his face for any tell. "So you're saying the filing just disappeared?" His tone suggested I might be confused about the whole thing. "Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm saying." I pulled out my phone, showed him the photos I'd taken of every document before submission. Receipt number 47892B. Clerk's name was Jennifer Morton. Timestamp 3:22 p.m. yesterday. Rodriguez made a show of typing things into his computer. "Well, Mr. Ellison, sometimes these technical glitches—" "This isn't a glitch," I cut in, keeping my voice level. "I need this reviewed and indexed before December 1st. That's less than 2 weeks away." Frank had already drafted an affidavit while I was waiting, outlining the chain of custody in language that would make a lawyer proud. I slid it across the desk along with a formal complaint. "I'll need this logged and stamped," I said. "Both copies." My phone buzzed while Rodriguez was dealing with the paperwork. Michael's name lit up the screen, straight to voicemail this time. I let it ring through. Dad. His voice had that edge to it, the one that showed up whenever things weren't going his way. "Stop making this hard. You're just dragging things out for no reason. Call me back so we can handle this like family." Like family. You know what's funny about those words? How quick they turn hollow when someone's trying to use them against you. I saved that message, added it to my growing file of evidence. The timestamp would matter later. Frank had been clear about that. By the time I got home, exhaustion hit me harder than any double shift I'd pulled at the garage. My bones felt like they were made of lead, dragging me down with every step through the front door. The house seemed bigger somehow, emptier, the kind of empty that echoes. I found myself in the living room, staring at Margaret's chair. It was just a plain thing, really. Brown fabric, worn armrests from years of her hands resting there while she read or did her crosswords. But seeing it there, catching the late afternoon light just the way it used to when she'd sit with her tea, my fingers traced the fabric where hers had worn it smooth. "Maybe they're right, Marge," I whispered. "Maybe this is too much house for just me now." The fight drained out of me then, like oil from a cracked pan. All those years of memories pressed down. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet evenings, with Margaret laughing at some silly thing on TV. What was I really fighting for? A building? Some walls and windows that creaked with every winter wind. The dusk was getting thick outside, shadows crawling up the walls like they were trying to tell me something. Sleep, maybe. Sleep before I made any decisions I couldn't take back. I had just settled into my recliner, not even bothering with the lights, when the pounding started at my front door. Hard, urgent knocks that meant business. "Walt!" Frank's voice carried through the wood. "Open up. I've got something." "That can't wait." My joints protested as I pushed myself up. But Frank's tone had that old Navy urgency in it, the kind that meant either trouble or opportunity was breathing down our necks. I opened the door to find Frank standing there in his old peacoat, the one he'd worn on countless fishing trips, where we'd solved the world's problems over thermos coffee. His eyes had that gleam I remembered from when we'd figure out particularly tricky transmission problems back in the day. "Got your lifeline right here, Walt," he said, patting his leather briefcase. "But we gotta move fast." I let him in, flicking on the kitchen lights. The plastic Thanksgiving bag was still sitting there like a bad joke, but Frank didn't even glance at it. He spread papers across my table with military precision. "Two-step play," he said, tapping the first document. "Step 1. We resubmit everything with attached affidavits. Yours about the original filing, mine about the legal review of the clause. Step 2. We petition the court administrator directly for an emergency hearing slot. The December deadline gives us grounds for expedited review." My coffee maker gurgled to life. Some habits don't wait for crisis. "You really think they'll fast-track it?" With documented proof of lost filings? They better. Frank's jaw set in that familiar way. Besides, I'm not leaving that counter until they do. You know what loyalty looks like. It looks like a retired Navy man standing in your kitchen at 8 p.m., plotting strategy like it's his own house on the line. We spent the next hour printing exhibits and binding copies. Frank checked each page twice, reminded me of Margaret organizing tax records, though I kept that thought to myself. When we finished, the packet looked official enough to impress a senator. "Ready?" Frank asked, straightening his peacoat. I grabbed my jacket. As I'll ever be. The county office was nearly empty when we arrived. Rodriguez looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face at seeing Frank in full retired military mode beside me. "Mr. Ellison," Rodriguez started, but Frank cut in. "We have a complete filing for expedited review," he said, laying down the packet. "Given the documented loss of prior submission and pending December 1st deadline, we'll need your personal verification of receipt." I watched Rodriguez's eyes narrow, then dart between us. Something shifted in his expression, maybe recognizing he couldn't brush this one under the carpet. "Initial each page," Frank continued, his tone leaving no room for debate. "And we'll need the expedited stamp." Rodriguez worked through the stack methodically while I stood there, feeling the weight of every second. When the red expedited stamp finally hit the cover page, my shoulders dropped an inch. "Courthouse next," Frank muttered as we walked out. "Strike while the iron's hot." The courthouse clerk was a young woman who reminded me of Evelyn before the college years changed her. She actually read through our filing, nodding at the affidavits. "This should qualify for priority scheduling," she said, stamping our receipt. "Given the time sensitivity, I'll flag it for immediate review." "We appreciate that," I said, meaning it. "I'll make sure it gets slotted," she promised, handing me the receipt. "Watch your email for the hearing notice." Frank and I grabbed dinner at the diner afterward, first real food I'd had since that morning. We were halfway through our burgers when my phone buzzed. The email subject line read, "Hearing notice, Ellison property, matter. Next week," I read aloud, relief making my voice rough. "Wednesday at 10 a.m. "That's our shot," Frank said, raising his coffee cup. "Now we prepare like hell." Back home, I printed the notice and put it under Margaret's favorite fridge magnet, the one shaped like a little lemon. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, but it didn't sound like a countdown anymore, more like a march towards something. I spread my files across the table, deed, clause, photos, timeline. Each piece of evidence needed to be ready, each detail sharp in my mind when I took the stand. I could almost see Michael's face when the judge read Margaret's handwritten clause aloud, if the judge read it. Frank and I pulled into the courthouse lot an hour early. The morning frost still coated the windshields of the few parked cars, and our breath made clouds in the dim light. Felt like one of those winter mornings when I'd open the garage before sunrise, checking my tools before a big transmission job. "Ready?" Frank asked, adjusting his tie. He'd shown up wearing his old Navy uniform jacket, pressed crisp enough to cut paper. I patted the leather satchel in my lap, as ready as 40 years of paperwork can make me. The security line moved quick, barely anyone there that early. The guard, Bill, gave me a nod as I emptied my pockets. We'd gone to the same high school, though he probably didn't remember. His eyes lingered on the satchel going through the X-ray. "Quite a stack of papers there, Walt," he said, handing it back. "Sometimes you need every page to tell the truth." We found a wooden bench outside courtroom C, and I started laying out our arsenal like I used to arrange tools before a difficult repair. Original deed on top, Margaret's handwritten addendum protected in its plastic sleeve, then the chronological trail of receipts and affidavits, each document tagged with colored tabs that Frank had insisted on. "Review it one more time," Frank said. So I did. Practiced the key points under my breath. Dates, signatures, facts only. No emotion, no accusations, just the truth Margaret had written down years ago. Remember those moments before a big race, when you're checking every bolt and connection one last time. That's how it felt, making sure each exhibit tab stuck out just right, that every signature stayed clear and readable. My hands wanted to shake, but I wouldn't let them. "Here they come," Frank muttered. I didn't need to look up. The click of Melissa's heels on marble gave them away, along with that perfume she wore like armor. When I did glance over, Michael and Evelyn were leading their little parade, both wearing those practiced smiles that probably worked great in their business meetings. Melissa leaned close to Evelyn, whispering something behind her manicured hand that made them both smirk, the kind of look that said they'd already won. They just hadn't collected their prize yet. I kept my eyes on my papers, adjusting the tabs one last time. Anger wouldn't help now. I'd learned that lesson fixing engines for impatient customers. Getting hot just burns your own hands. All rise. The bailiff's voice bounced off the marble as the judge entered. Older woman, steel-grey hair, reading glasses on a chain. She sat down and immediately opened our file, frowning as she flipped through the pages. Could have been anything, that frown. Maybe she had heartburn. Maybe she'd seen 1,000 family property disputes just like this one. Or maybe, Ellison matter, she announced, looking up. Property deed dispute and transfer. Injunction, correct? Yes, Your Honor. Michael's attorney answered first. Young guy, expensive suit, probably cost more than my first car. The judge nodded, still frowning at the paperwork. I see we have an interesting situation here, with a handwritten addendum to the original deed. Mr. Ellison Sr., are you representing yourself today? Yes, Your Honor. My voice came out steady. 40 years of giving honest estimates to worried customers teaches you that much. Very well. She tapped her papers straight. Opening remarks then. Let's start with... She paused, squinting at something on the page. Then she reached for Margaret's addendum, the original in its plastic sleeve that I'd just handed to the clerk. The courtroom clock ticked loud enough to hear. Funny how time works. Spent 2 weeks racing against it, and now everything narrowed down to watching the judge's eyes move across my wife's handwriting. I glanced at Frank, who gave me the same tiny nod he probably used to give nervous recruits. Across the aisle, Michael shifted in his seat, and Melissa's whispers had gone quiet. The judge adjusted her glasses, holding the document closer. This is quite specific language, she murmured almost to herself. Then louder, Counsel, approach. The lawyers huddled at the bench for what felt like hours but couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. When they stepped back, the judge adjusted her microphone and held up Margaret's addendum. For the record, she began, I'm going to read the relevant portion of this handwritten addendum dated March 15th, 1998. She cleared her throat, and Margaret's words filled the courtroom through the judge's voice. I, Margaret Ann Ellison, being of sound mind, do hereby affirm that my husband, Walter James Ellison, shall retain full and exclusive controlling ownership of our marital home at 1247 Oak Street until the time of his natural death. This provision supersedes any verbal agreements or informal arrangements regarding future transfers of ownership. My children, Michael and Evelyn, are aware of my wishes in this matter. The judge paused, adjusting her glasses. The document bears Margaret Ellison's signature, witnessed by Frank Morrison, notary public, and was properly recorded with the county on March 16, 1998. I watched Michael's face go slack, like someone had pulled a plug. That confident smile drained away faster than oil from a cracked pan. Evelyn's lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared, her eyes darting between her brother and her lawyer. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady as a level, I've prepared a timeline of recent events with supporting documentation. She nodded, and I handed over the chronology Frank had helped me put together. Every date, every interaction, every lost filing documented with military precision. As you'll see, I attempted to address this through proper channels immediately after Thanksgiving. When my initial filings disappeared from the system, Mr. Morrison provided an affidavit detailing our efforts to preserve the record. Michael's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, regardless of ancient paperwork, the family's clear intention was... Counsel, the judge cut him off. I'm not interested in undefined intentions. I'm looking at notarized, recorded documents that speak for themselves. She held up the affidavit. And I'm particularly concerned about these allegations regarding mishandled filings. The room shifted then, like when you finally break loose a rusted bolt, that moment when resistance gives way to momentum. I kept my breathing steady, the way Margaret taught me during her chemo treatments. In, out, don't rush the moment. But, Your Honor, Michael stood up, his voice catching. This is a family matter. We only wanted... Mr. Ellison Jr., the judge's tone could have stripped paint. This stopped being a family matter when you attempted to circumvent legal property rights. Please be seated. She shuffled her papers, lined them up square with the bench. The clock on the wall marked each second with a click. that sounded as loud as hammer falls. I squeezed the satchel's handle, feeling the worn leather under my palm, waiting. The judge removed her glasses and looked straight at me. "Mr. Ellison Sr., your wife's addendum is properly executed, properly recorded, and creates a clear controlling interest that cannot be transferred without your consent. Moreover, the attempted transfer filing appears to have been made with full knowledge of this restriction." She turned to Michael's side of the room. "I am ordering an immediate injunction against any attempt to transfer ownership of the property at 1247 Oak Street. The controlling interest remains solely with Walter James Ellison, as per the 1998 addendum." I felt Frank's hand grip my shoulder as the judge continued. "Furthermore, I'm referring the matter of the mishandled court filings to the county clerk's office for investigation. This court takes allegations of procedural interference very seriously." She picked up her gavel, and I could swear I saw the ghost of a smile cross her face. "Let the record reflect that the original deed and addendum are to remain in full force and effect. Any future attempts to circumvent these documents will result in sanctions." The gavel cracked like a starting pistol. "Court is adjourned." I let out a breath I'd been holding since Thanksgiving, feeling something loosen in my chest, like when you finally get a seized bolt to break free after hours of careful pressure. Frank's hand was still steady on my shoulder as we gathered our papers. "Walter James Ellison." The judge's voice stopped me before I could turn. She'd taken off her glasses, and her eyes were direct. "The law protects what's rightfully yours. Remember that?" I nodded, dignity holding my spine straight while Michael slumped in his chair like someone had cut his strings. His lawyer was already packing up, probably calculating how to explain this mess to his firm. Evelyn wouldn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the floor tiles as if they held some secret escape route. You know what's funny about relief? It doesn't crash over you like waves in those movies. It seeps in slow, like oil working its way through an engine. Each breath came a little easier as we walked toward the door, our footsteps echoing off marble walls that had seen 1,000 family wars before ours. "Give it 24 hours, Frank muttered, nodding at a couple of familiar faces, pretending not to watch us pass. Small-town gossip moves faster than a nitro dragster. He wasn't wrong. Mrs. Peterson from the garden club was already typing on her phone before we cleared the courthouse steps. Old Tom Baker, who'd been on the city council since Dirt was young, tipped his hat with a look that said this story would make it to every coffee shop by sunrise. The December wind hit like a slap, carrying the smell of snow and something else, exhaust fumes. I spotted the source, Michael's contracting company truck idling at the curb, that fancy logo he'd paid a fortune for gleaming on the door. The driver recognized me, quickly looked away. Makes you wonder how many other folks would suddenly find urgent business elsewhere once word got around about a son trying to push his father into a home. "Need a ride?" Frank asked, but I shook my head. "Think I'll walk? Clear my head. Call if you need anything." He squeezed my shoulder one last time. "And Walter, Margaret would be proud." The 4 blocks home gave me time to feel every year of my 75 trips, around the sun, but my steps were sure. Neighbors watered their brown winter lawns or checked mail, every one of them finding reason to pause and watch me pass. News travels fast in our town. By dinner, they'd all know how Michael and Evelyn tried to take the house, how they'd served their father cold turkey in a plastic bag while they feasted inside. I thought about Michael's business as I walked. Construction's a trust business. Folks want to know who they're letting into their homes. Family values was painted right on his trucks. Wonder how that would play now. The house was waiting when I got there, solid as ever. My key turned in the lock, the same lock I'd installed 30 years back when we first moved in. The foyer was quiet, holding its breath like it knew something wasn't finished yet. I set my satchel down, old leather creaking against the hardwood Margaret had polished. Every spring, there was one more thing to do. I reached for the stepladder we kept in the hall closet, the same one I'd used to hang Christmas lights with Michael when he was small enough to ride on my shoulders. The nail was still there in the foyer wall, where Margaret's portrait had hung until she got sick and couldn't stand seeing herself fade. I lifted the frame, kept safe in my bedroom all these years, and felt its familiar weight. Her smile beamed out from behind the glass, the same smile that had lit up every room she entered. "Well, old girl," I said quietly, settling the frame onto the nail. "Looks like you knew what you were doing." She watched over the entryway now, guardian of the home she'd made sure would stay mine. Through the window I could see Mrs. Peterson talking to her neighbour across the street, both of them gesturing at my house. The quiet clicked and hummed around me, the furnace cycling on, the old pipes singing, the clock Margaret loved marking another hour past. The satchel landed on the kitchen counter with a soft thud, right next to that plastic bag from Thanksgiving. Funny how something so small could start an avalanche. I lifted the bag, still heavy with cold turkey and congealed gravy, and carried it to the trash bin. The lid opened with a creak, and I dropped the whole thing in, letting metal snap shut with a sound like justice served. You know what victory really feels like? Not fanfare or flag waving. It's the quiet satisfaction of putting things right, like adjusting a timing belt until the engine purrs perfect. I fished in my coat pocket for the hardware store receipt, picture hooks, finishing nails, and that can of lemon polish Margaret always swore by. The polish wasn't strictly necessary, but some habits die hard. Besides, the house deserved a proper homecoming. The foyer waited patient as ever while I sorted through the nail selection. Margaret's portrait watched from where I'd propped it, her smile knowing and warm. Even in the photo, she had that look, the one that said she could see 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Turns out she did, with that clause she'd tucked away like an ace up her sleeve. "You always were the smart one," I murmured, testing the wall above the mantel for the stud. Found it on the first try, another old habit. The nail drove home clean and true, just like she would have wanted. The frame settled into place, like it had been waiting all these years to return. I stepped back, adjusted the angle until it hung perfectly level. That's when the morning light caught it just right, sending a gleam across the glass that made her eyes sparkle, almost like she was winking at our little victory. I set the deed folder on the entry table, leather worn smooth from years of handling. It looked right there, like a captain's log keeping watch. The house felt different now, not just mine by memory and mortgage, but by law and right. Margaret had made sure of that. News travels fast in small towns, and bad news travels fastest of all. Before I'd even made it home from the courthouse, Mrs. Peterson's garden club phone tree was probably burning up with updates. By tomorrow, everyone who mattered would know how Michael and Evelyn tried to push their father aside. Contractors live and die by reputation in a place like this. You can't sell family values when the whole town knows you served your dad leftovers on the porch. The sunlight shifted, warming Margaret's portrait just so. She'd planned this too, I'd bet. Not just protecting the house, but making sure any betrayal would carry its own punishment. Michael's business would feel it first. People here take care of their own, and they've got long memories for those who don't. I uncapped the lemon polish, and that familiar, sharp, sweet scent filled the air. Maybe it was imagination, but the house seemed to breathe it in, coming alive again. The woodwork gleamed as I worked, each stroke bringing back some memory. Christmas mornings, graduation photos, quiet Sunday afternoons when the kids were small and the world was simpler. Standing there under Margaret's watchful gaze, I felt my shoulders straighten. The weight I'd carried since Thanksgiving lifted, replaced by something stronger. She'd known I'd need armor against the winter of aging, known our children might mistake kindness for weakness, and she'd left me the tools to prove what she'd always said: a man's dignity is not disposable.